we just went live?
I think we lost our producer, but good evening. We are live tonight, Paranormal Science Lab. I'm Lisa.
I'm John.
And we're very pleased to have as our guest tonight Loyd Auerbach. Loyd, how are you doing?
Doing fine, thanks.
Hi, Loyd.
Loyd, you've been in the field for a very long time, have done so many things, and let's start with what's going on now. I saw in your bio that you've got a new book coming out.
Yeah, we're just trying to get it all done, and in the meantime, we're also writing an academic book at the same time. So I'm hoping to have this out by the end of the first week of June. It'll be on Amazon. It's called ESP WARS, and I am the third author on the book. It's actually a book about the U.S. and Soviet/Russian psychic spying programs. The first author, Edwin May, was the project director for Stargate for over 10 years and involved with the project longer than that. And he got to know some of the Russians, so we have contributions from the Russians. And thanks also to Victor Rubel, who's the second author. And then also Joe McMoneagle, the U.S. government's #1 viewer, contributed heavily to the book, as did several Russian generals.
Wow.
So you're telling me that Stargate is real?
Not that Stargate. not the Stargate. It's kind of funny when the TV show came on. I think that the folks at the actual Stargate project were a little worried.
Someone's been talking, huh?
Holy crap!
Yeah, because it had nothing to do with what they were doing. So, yeah, the U.S. our government program had a bunch of different names. One of the earlier names was Project Grilled Flame. So they made no sense. Government projects make no sense. The idea is to try to make them make no sense.
Did you say Grilled Flame?
Yeah, I think
Grill Flame. That's right. Grilled Flame.
Grilled Flame. Wow, that's
exciting, isn't it? Yeah.
Exciting, and well, at least, yeah, no one would assume that's what it was about. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. So the book will be out on Amazon and then other online booksellers early June, and it'll also be available in ebook form too.
Awesome. I mean, there of course been stories and rumors for decades about everything that went on. Without giving away any surprises, in your opinion, do you think that these operations contributed to real life research or practice?
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, the remote viewing project that we had going with the government used methods that were actually no different than what the more public research was going on. So Ed May was actually doing research in remote viewing publicly as well as doing the classified stuff. And the classified stuff was really more about their targets and who was doing the viewing than it was about the methods. They were successful either way. The Russians were doing their version of public and private, and military type of work as well. There was a lot of talk in the 60s and 70s about the Russians looking for psychotronic weapons to create mental weapons, mind control, and all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. And they spent a lot of time and money trying to do that. However, they failed. They continued after they knew they failed, and after they knew, apparently because they were trying to keep the money flowing to the research labs. There were 50 research labs being run, and some of what they were doing, let's just say that it was a lot of BS, the same way that we do BS in the corporate world here. You got to keep the money flowing, so you say, yeah, we haven't gotten there yet, we don't have an answer yet, but they actually weren't able to create the psychotronic weapons or generators they talked about. However, the Russians did train people to do remote viewing, and they work with psychics in the military, and even in the Chechenian War, they trained psychics. They put them through boot camp and had the psychics go out into the tanks on the front lines in Chechnya, so that they could actually warn the tank operators and the other folks what was coming around the corner, more or less. Real practical application stuff.
Any information as to whether or not how accurate they were in that kind of scenario?
In that particular scenario, they all lived, so they must have been accurate enough for that. we didn't get any stats from General Savin about that. I can tell you that the general statistic for actionable intelligence in our program was about 15% of the missions or tasks that they were given. They had actionable intelligence, which contributed somewhat to the closure of the program in that the actionable intelligence coming from our on-the-ground sources at the time was about 15% as well, which is kind of scary. Think about that. You have agents all over the world or information sources, informants, and their abilities or to gather intelligence was statistically no better than the remote viewers.
Wow.
And unfortunately, the argument that it was probably a different 15% didn't hold a lot of water when they were deciding to continue the program or not. So
basically, every time that someone says they should have known this was coming, that's really the reason, is that the
the whole bureaucracy thing they were battling. I know Ed was battling that all along. And in fact, one of the pieces of our book, a good chunk of our book, is about the bureaucracy and about the politics of the psychic programs, both in the U.S. and Soviet Union and in Russia. So it's actually kind of it's not just about the psychic stuff. It's about how all these things operated and why they ended, why they even got started to begin with, is in there as well. And as far as coming up, there was not a lot of real success at predictive, precognitive work. Precognition is not going to be highly accurate simply because things can be changed. We do know that.
Well, yeah, variables can change, and it's
right.
hard to implement policy based on that.
Right. It's like predicting the weather. Which, by the way, is a science, recognized physical science too. So.
Well, yeah, and I'd say probably 15% is about as accurate as it gets sometimes. Based on everything that happened in those programs, what would you like to see as a focus for future research, whether it's private or sector or academic or whatever, into the field?
Well, the application for missing people, for missing children, for kind of law enforcement related applications have been proven out in many, many different ways, both with these programs. Actually, the Soviets used it. The Russians have been using it for law enforcement quite a bit. And for drug deals, to find out where the drug dealers are, apparently, things like that. We've had psychics working with police here unofficially for the most part. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to see a lot more of that. I'd like to see a lot more application more officially, because it doesn't cost much to have these folks try stuff. And, if they're bound to follow up on leads that are phoned in anonymously, I don't see why they can't be bound to, can't work with people who actually have a proven track record. Like Joe McMoneagle has an amazing track record, so does Angela Ford, two of the viewers from the Stargate program. And there are psychics who have really great track records with working with police. So that's a really good application, again, for finding missing people. The other application, which has been used, actually, not necessarily the remote viewing, but by psychics since probably the 1800s, has been in archaeology, although very much on the down low. Archaeologists don't like to talk about that. Yeah.
Huh. As almost a site.
Yeah.
Wow. Any particular examples that you know of?
There have been remote viewing examples specifically for remote viewing with some finding a ship underwater. But, all I can give you are, the first person who really wrote about this was a man named Frederick Bly Bond in the early 1900s and wrote a great book called Gates of Remembrance about this. There are a couple books on psychic archaeology that are out there, one by Stephen Schwartz and a couple other ones as well. And I remember, actually, the funny thing is, when I was in college at Northwestern, I think it was like an archaeology 101 class. It was just basically a basic archaeology class, part of my anthro undergrad. The professor was talking about a dig in Egypt, and they had found some what looked to be Roman marble statues at a level that was predating when the Romans actually had any contact with the Egyptians. And they didn't know where it was how did it get there? So his comment in the course of the lecture was something on the order of, so we turned it over to our to the psychic we had with us, and the psychic did a psychometric reading of it and told us what the trade route was, and just went on and on about the psychic and the information. And they found out that there was a trade route, and all that was actually proven out. And then, of course, that caused a little bit of a stir in the class when he just was off the cuff talking about a psychic. And at the end of the lecture, a couple other people, I was going to ask him, somebody else said, psychic? You had a psychic? Yeah, we have psychics every once in a while, because what does it hurt? Gives us information sometimes that we can follow up on.
Exactly.
They could also touch an object and probably get more information about an object to maybe tell where.
They were doing psychometry. That was a key factor in that particular element of that dig. I've heard of other psychics and remote viewers working with archaeologists who told them how far down to dig or where specifically to dig, just kind of like psychics have talked about finding oil and minerals as well.
Wow.
That's amazing. I think that it would be very interesting if a serious study was made developing data on that information.
I'd like to develop that ability. What are you talking about? I find all the gold I'd ever need.
All the lost rings.
All the lost rings and diamonds and.
Yeah, psychic metal detector. Yeah.
I'm down.
Cheaper than ground penetrating radar.
Absolutely.
Lloyd, for viewers that may not be as familiar with your background, why don't you just give a little bit of a rundown of some of the things you've done? It's hard to list them all, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I have a master's degree in parapsychology from John F. Kennedy University, which had an accredited program from 1977 through the late 80s. I got mine in 1981, and unfortunately, we had to kill the program because of mainly finances and funding, outside funding we had. After graduating, I worked at the American Society for Psychical Research in New York, and then I came back to JFK as core faculty teaching courses in parapsychology in the graduate school. I still am on faculty at JFK today. I'm still an adjunct professor. Although these days I teach mainly publishing and media skills over there. I am on faculty at Atlantic University teaching an online parapsychology course. I teach online courses through the Rhine Education Center for the Rhine Research Center. And I've written a number of books. My first one was pretty popular back in the 80s, called ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists. And while I focused on doing field investigations, I've really been kind of more of an educator and generalist in the field. So I've also worked with researchers as a consultant because of my other, I guess you could say, parallel career track, which is as a magician and psychic entertainer. So awesome. I'm a professional psychic entertainer, been performing that way for a long time. Before that, I was a professional magician, alongside my career in parapsychology, and been doing a lot of things. I'm president of the Forever Family Foundation, which is an organization, a nonprofit that helps connect mediums with people who are grieving and supports scientific research in life after death. And then I'm also on the board of the Rhine Research Center and a couple of other locations too, kind of advisory boards and a few other things. That's kind of a quick rundown. And I also make chocolate.
I was going to say, you were forgetting the very important one.
I'm not going to forget that.
Was it haunted chocolate? We're gonna need to try some of that here.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we're gonna have to check that out. We'll give a review on a future show. It's fantastic to have so many things going on. What do you think is the biggest misperception that people have about parapsychology?
Well, it depends on the group, of course. I think the general public sometimes seems to think that there's a lot more going on than there actually is. They're actually surprised to hear that there's so few researchers and research labs in the country. Partly because they keep running into psychics rather than, and ghost hunters and people like that. And the funding is really dried up over the years. So we're a very under-supported field as well, both in the laboratory and outside the laboratory. And I think the biggest misconception in the ghost hunting, the paranormal community, is that parapsychology has anything to do with you guys. That's I've been fighting this for quite a while, as have several of my colleagues, and you don't see parapsychologists at the conferences. because they don't want us there. The guys on Ghost Hunters, the TV show, the producers did not want parapsychologists as part of the show. In fact, most of the shows don't want us involved at all because we're going to call them on their crap.
Right.
And I've actually turned down a bunch of shows because of the crap. Yeah.
Say it's not so.
Yeah, it's okay to watch those shows for entertainment if you find them entertaining, but following the methods you see on TV shows in the paranormal would be, you can't learn to do something from a TV show that summarizes things and then misconstrues what's going on. Whether the investigators themselves are credible or not, the producers are in charge of what shows up on the screen.
Exactly. We do a lot of public events and educational events at historic sites and so forth, and we get those kind of questions all the time, and I think that's the one thing that people are the most surprised about is that when we tell them that what they're watching on TV isn't what really happens. And,
right.
And so we agree with you that education needs to be done. And although I think a lot of the shows have been good in some respects, making the topics more mainstream, I think they've done a disservice in some ways too. So, yeah, I mean,
of course, definitely people have come out of the woodwork with their interest in this subject, and that's been a very positive thing. The negative thing is that most of the people are not willing to listen to or read anything from anyone who contradicts what they see on those TV shows. And you'd think that if people were really interested, that they'd be interested in learning something about the subject. And it's just much easier to sit and watch a TV show, of course.
Exactly. And going on that point, let's delve into a little bit of what isn't accurate in what you see on TV.
First thing that's inaccurate is sitting in the dark and waiting around for something to happen doesn't really happen scientifically for a number of reasons. First of all, it's contradictory to the situation if the people are experiencing something at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to decide that you're going to do an investigation at 4 o'clock in the morning. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Right. Most people, as we know in our field, for the reports that have been gathered, thousands and thousands and thousands of reports since the late 1800s, people have experiences with the lights on or when it's daylight, not when the lights are out and they're asleep. So that happens once in a while, but it's pretty rare. Secondly, there are so many studies in psychology and other fields that show that people are terrible observers when they're in the dark. Absolutely awful observers in the dark. The reason the dark thing happened, in fact, for the most part, is because of TV production and because they actually wanted to shoot stuff that looked spooky. And I can attest to that from working with television in the 80s when producers were always moaning about the fact that we couldn't turn the lights out to make things spooky because the camera guys didn't have night shot. It didn't exist at that time, and they couldn't shoot anything without lights on. So, they kind of had to show things a little bit more realistically. The other thing is that the equipment, the technology that's out there, there's two types that people use now. One is for communication ostensibly, and the other is for detection. But really, things like EMF detectors, temperature gauges, those things only detect the environment. They do not detect anything paranormal. They may be affected by things that are paranormal, but they're really used and have been used scientifically to look for environmental changes that happen in connection to human experience, meaning you can't get rid of the witnesses. You can't put them out of the house. You have to have them there to have the experiences, or bring in psychics or other people to have those experiences. You need a human experience to even define that that what the anomaly might mean if you get something anomalistic on any device. The communication devices, there's so much, frankly, crappy claims about different spirit boxes and this kind of communication, and nobody's checking to see whether they do what they say they do in terms of even randomly scanning the environment. They only claim to randomly scan the environment and be affected by things. And we have a ton of evidence showing that living humans can affect random event generators, things that create randomness, meaning that a lot of what people get may be legit in terms of not having a normal explanation, but the operator may be causing it, not a spirit.
Well, and we actually find that an awful lot, and we kind of we find that often it is the investigator that seems to be the big variable, and
Right.
we'll switch out to see if you have the same effect, the same responses with different people on the team, and often it's centered around one person that night. It may not be the same one every time, but and we've also done a lot of research. We work with a lot of places that we've been thousands of hours there, and even we'll run equipment for days on end, and the activity really is centered when people are there. Generally, when you leave, after a while, pretty much it gets dead. Avoid part of the fun, but
you need the interaction with human beings, because we actually, the things that we're studying, we're investigating, we're defining by a human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And people tend to forget that without a human being first reporting the experience, how do you know the place is haunted to begin with?
Well, yeah, I mean,
That's true.
It's a little bit of the Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
cat there?
I mean, you could have five deceased people, five ghosts hanging around a place, but you would not know unless there was someone living there to interact with them to know that they were there. So you have to, throwing the witness out, like some of the TV shows do, getting rid of the witness, claiming the witness testimony is anecdotal. Well, that's actually what you're investigating. You're not investigating the place. And then, one of the biggest things that I really have a problem with some of the shows talking about anecdotal evidence being bad evidence, when in fact witness testimony is all we actually have.
Mm-hmm.
We rarely have anything physical happening. And then they kick the witnesses out, and then they have their own experiences. How are their experiences not anecdotal? Just because they happen on camera. I mean, we don't really see the ghost attacking them or doing anything, so that's anecdotal. Their evidence is no better than anybody else's.
Yeah, if they're touched or whatever, there's no way for anyone else to validate that.
Right.
So,
and frankly, they have a lot more to lose by, if they don't lie, if they don't say that there's something going on.
Exactly. They have more motive. There's more motive and opportunity there than for, say, the homeowner who risks, are my neighbors going to think I'm nuts, or, or is there going to be repercussions, and especially if I take it on TV. So I tend to give more credence to that homeowner who's willing to put themselves out there like that, particularly on TV, than the production company.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Do you think there's a format for a show that would address some of those problems?
Yeah, the thing is that there are some successful shows, or semi-successful shows, I think. There were people, there was one called The Ghostly Encounters, kind of like Celebrity Ghost Stories in some respects. The people themselves told their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you really combine the ghost story, because the ghost story is what people are really interested in. Although the shows that we see, that really the paranormal shows are about the team, they're not about the story.
Right.
You stick the group in a different location every time, but it's really about them. It's not about the investigation or anything like that. So in order to do something right, you'd have to focus on the story itself, the witnesses, and whether you do recreations or not, reenactments or not, it's a matter of bringing in that story along with the methods and understanding what might actually be going on, and being really clear that, we've done plenty of cases on TV over the years, and a lot of times nothing happens.
Right.
And that just is the nature of what we're dealing with. It's like, going out looking for an animal. The animal may not be there. And in fact, you could go to the most haunted location on the planet with tons of ghosts there. And if they don't want to be around when you're shooting the show, nothing will happen.
That's right.
What's the enticement for the ghosts to actually be there? I mean, they don't have to really be enticed. And in fact, they're driven off a lot of times by what's going on, it seems. Because they're people too. I've been playing with producers over the years. We've had some formats. It's just the networks don't want to go for anything that, in some respects, smacks of credibility, because it doesn't fit their supposedly proven track record of having crazy people do investigations or making it sensationalistic. And there are plenty of ways to do that, to actually dress it up with the right budget, you could dress up a show just right so that it really does look not only look very cool, but it actually gets some real data in and brings in really, really good stories and the best people.
Well, and actually, I think if you make it more story-driven, you can make it more interesting because it does become, well, even from an entertainment factor, because it becomes more like, entertainment-wise, like a movie, like, something that people would watch anyway, and not just this reality show that we're going to see how the investigators interact again this week, which is what
and run screaming if a bug lands on them or something.
Yeah, I'm going out to find a ghost, yell at them, and then something happens and I scream and run.
Yeah. Spider.
And then, unfortunately, the networks have a lot to say here. One producer I work with, production company, they didn't go with the proposal we had. They actually contacted us to come up with a proposal. They didn't go with our group because the psychic we had was too old. They wanted a 23-year-old blonde psychic bombshell. And we didn't have anybody that young that was that hot. We did have...
Yeah, they didn't have you, John.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing is you have to have the right... They want certain demographics in the team. They want the hot young thing in the team. It depends on who their demographic happens to be that they're going for. And that in itself, it's just the nature of television. It's the nature of so-called reality TV. They want pretty people on TV for the most part.
Well, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm screwed.
Hey, Loyd, how do you feel about a kind of question from a chat room here? How do you feel as a scientist about provoking during an investigation?
I think it's the stupidest thing in the world, frankly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, and not necessarily. Certainly, it's not scientific. I mean, it would be scientific to try it once, if that's your hypothesis that ghosts only interact if people are being provocative in that way. But then you have to assume that the family members were doing that, which they typically are not. The biggest problem comes from a more humanistic perspective, and that is, if you were a ghost haunting somebody's house and somebody starts yelling at you, how are you going to react? You're either going to run, hide, just leave, or you're going to react, I don't know, in a very negative way, and then all of a sudden the team then calls that person a demon.
Yeah.
So actually, the folks doing the provocation are being rude and demonic, if you want to call them. They're the ones who are acting inhuman in some respects.
Amen, brother.
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
We've had tons of stuff happen in cases, whether we've done investigations for TV or not over the years, by being a little lighthearted, by going in with the family, trying to reduce their fear, to try to have fun. Yelling at ghosts to bring them out does not reduce the family's fear. It just increases it, in fact. Because now they're going to feel like, well, what if you provoke it and he gets really angry and then you leave? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So treating people living and dead like real people, like people you want to be friendly with, always generates cooperation and more phenomena, actually.
Yeah, we get a hell of a lot more information and phenomena like you're talking about from just being nice and being respectful. I agree with you 100%. I mean, there's absolutely no need in it in my book, and I'm like you. If somebody come in my house yelling and screaming and cussing at me, it's not going to be pretty. You know?
Yeah, I mean, half the ghost hunters, they say that they have a demonic entity because they got an EVP that said "get out." My guess is that the spirits they were trying to provoke, or they came in, they were very rude, and the ghost was just saying "get out."
Exactly.
I'm actually surprised there haven't been a lot of 4-letter words used on EVPs, by some of the ghosts. I'd be slapping them upside the head if somebody did that to me if I was a ghost.
Yeah, if I was pure energy, it'd be on.
Yeah, right.
Especially with your sense of humor.
Yeah. Oh, dude. I'd have a hat on. I know that.
Yeah, I find the nearest pie shop and start slamming people with pies in the face, I think.
Oh, that'd be fun.
That would be awesome. Just whipped cream, though. You don't want to waste the pudding.
That's true. Yeah.
Oh my! What? How would you like to see specifically parapsychology brought into the paranormal field?
Well, the simplest way would be for folks to actually start being interested in the connection. The fact that parapsychologists have been studying these things since, before the actual formation of the Society for Psychical Research back in 1882. I think that people should start looking at the findings of people in the field, especially through the organizations like the SPR in Great Britain, which they can join and support, and the Rhine Research Center, which is in Durham, North Carolina, which they can join and support and actually get something back from. And those are both nonprofit organizations. I'd like to see people taking courses. There are many courses, short courses that are offered by myself, by the Rhine Education Center. I offer them through the Rhine Center, but I also offer them through other locations too, including HCH Institute here in the Bay Area, and I teach distance classes. There are folks like Carolyn Watt, who has a really intense introduction to parapsychology as a science out of the University of Edinburgh that's for non-academics. There are several of us in the field that offer different educational opportunities, but more importantly, just read some books. People want to do it for free because I have people saying that you shouldn't charge for education. It's like, yeah, that's really idiotic. And actually, the two people who said that recently when I posted courses on Facebook, both of whom charge for their appearances at conferences.
Wow.
So, yeah, how dare I charge for education? And here it is, they're charging for their appearances at conferences. So, and they're nobodies actually when it comes down to it. There are books available for free, the best source of which is archive.org, the Internet Archive, from the early researchers, including books on ghost hunting and the early ghost hunters and the findings of folks, some of the proceedings and journals from the American Society for Psychical Research and the British Society are there for free. A lot of great ghost stories, a lot of great ghost investigations, a lot of great paranormal techniques, and not just in the laboratory, but most of it's outside the laboratory because the lab stuff hadn't even started until around 1915, 1916. So you have a lot of the stuff is free, and when we tell people about it, it's like I get this stare like, you want me to read a book? If it's not on the internet, they don't want to read it. But there are great sources of information. I have a lot of links on my website to reputable organizations that have a lot of free information. I have a lot of free information on my site as well. My site is mindreader.com, and you can get to the SBR site, you can get to the Rhine site, a ton of great stuff for free, and then you get a lot more if you join some of those organizations. But there's a lot of free stuff, and just starting with using your curiosity to find out what other people have learned about ghosts and hauntings and poltergeists. And that's how I'd like to see parapsychology brought in. I understand that people may not be interested in ESP research or remote viewing or other things, but they should at least be interested in what the scientists have found about methodologies and what works and what doesn't work and what our theories and models are. Because it'll save you a lot of time down the road. Basically, that's the idea. It's going to save you time if you understand the mistakes people have made and what we know works and what doesn't work.
Well, I agree. That's the only way you make forward progress is to know what's happened and take what works and know what to reject. And I really don't understand why. I've never understood why the paranormal field per se has rejected that. I think it's a huge asset, and even remote viewing. Now, we do know a team out of Kansas City that uses a remote viewer, and I think that's an excellent.
He's entirely off-site, so that he really has.
California, I think.
Yeah, he doesn't have any sort of contact with the building itself. It's strictly through
I've done that. Yeah, I've done that with a couple psychics myself. I give them the address of the location and let them actually even look at it on Google Earth if they want to, just to get a feel of what's inside, what's going on inside. Yeah, and there are many techniques you can get from our field that have worked and have been applied to doing investigations. It's just crazy. I'll tell you one of the reasons why a lot of the paranormal community has been refusing this or just ignoring it is because people who are their icons, like Jason and Grant, don't know anything themselves about the field. Because they self-admittedly have not read any books on the field. They've admitted that on their show. Same thing goes with a lot of the other folks. There was one person in the paranormal state team, Sergey, knew a lot about parapsychology, but he wasn't really able to say anything about it on the show because the show was very demon-focused, which was Ryan Buell's particular personal focus. Mm-hmm. So, you have producers who don't want experts to contradict the investigators. You have producers who, if you have an expert on, they're going to edit it so that the investigators seem like they're the smart ones, not necessarily the expert, or the expert totally agrees with them. And then you have people who just who are on these shows who have no interest in. They've been doing it themselves, however they figured it out themselves for years. But that doesn't mean that they're doing it the right way. And if they're unwilling to take a look at what works, what has been in the past, it's difficult. I was at one conference a number of years ago, and somebody from one of the shows got up and said that there's no significant literature on this field before like the late 1990s, which made me and Michelle Belanger, both of us, kind of like jumped up and said, "What the hell are you talking about?" It's like, there's over 100 years of literature on the field, and people don't even know that this has been going on since the 1800s. They seem to think that it all started with television.
Well, and I think that, there certainly is too much of in my opinion, a focus on the bright lights and talking boxes and that kind of thing. And for the most part, to be honest, is no different than a Star Trek set in the '60s. Blinking lights and. Well,
funny you should mention that. Back in the 80s, especially once Ghostbusters came out, a lot of the news people knew right off the bat that we didn't have anything like any of those pieces of equipment. But the production people always asked, "Don't you have anything that has blinking lights and makes noise?" Mm-hmm. And there were a number of times that the director or producer I was with on a couple shoots would say that, and I said, "Well, I've got something that's untested," and I pull out a toy tricorder. And it never made it to air because, it was like this unspoken joke between me and the camera guy and the sound guy. I pull out this toy tricorder. The sound guy and the camera guy always knew what it was right off the bat because they were either into Star Trek or they knew it. Yeah. The directors just didn't know anything. So I'd have this thing in my hand, and they would cut the camera and they'd say it was still rolling. I mean, every single time. I didn't have a single camera guy shoot any of that stuff. But we kind of pissed off a whole bunch of directors because of it. And I still carry it in my equipment bag, by the way.
That's awesome. That is awesome. That is awesome. And I think it's because, I think TV audiences do get very preoccupied with the blinking lights and so forth.
Yeah, television's a visual medium, and that's the biggest problem, actually. It is a visual medium, so you want to be able to show something. And we were dealing with things you can't really show. And so you have to craft the show in a way that it's got drama, which is the story, the ghost story, the people telling a good story. You find witnesses who can tell a good story. That's what you do. You don't find just anybody to do a case. And you have to work it through in understanding what's actually going on. And the thing is that it's like a detective show. It's not much different than a cop show, which is, without the guns. And you can do it that way. You can make it into a mystery because there's something going on. It's a crime, more or less, that's been reported. You're investigating that. You have a theory. The only thing we can't say is we don't have we don't have the final person we're booking into. We're not throwing them in the police car at the end.
Right.
But there are ways you can deal with that at the end and still make it interesting to people.
And I think that's the sort of the missing formula right now is getting that past the powers that be. So, what direction do you see parapsychology going at this point?
Well, our field, the field itself does a lot of laboratory research in all sorts of areas. We have people who do work in applied psychic functioning or researching that. We have kind of from a scientific perspective, most of it is experimental, but there's an awful lot of work looking at field field work, such as some of my colleagues have done research projects looking at whether or not spirit, the orbs that people capture are photographic or not, looking at what the connection is between electromagnetic fields in locations and people's reports of these things. So we actually study those things. We study all sorts of environmental technology to see whether we have any correlations to changes in the environment, people's experiences, which may be causing the experience, not necessarily be a result of some phenomenon. So from a theoretical perspective or a modeling perspective, we're still doing that sort of work outside the laboratory. Studying people who are psychic. There are some research projects going on with mediums right now looking at both how well they do under extremely well-controlled conditions and also what's going on in their brains to see that there is something different about what's happening when they're, for example, connecting with the spirit and when they're not, or in a sensible spirit. So we're doing work in that area. What we need really is more younger people in the field, because our field is getting old and we don't have a lot of newer people coming in, partly because there's no educational opportunities here in the United States. There's a lot of people coming in Great Britain, in the UK. There are 20 universities that have, at least 20 universities that actually have someone teaching some form of parapsychology at the university level. But the United States, it's so taboo because of prejudice of various scientists and academics that it's impossible to get anything through, even to most of the accrediting bodies. So having a
Is that bias? Is that bias worse than it was in the past, you think? Or
yeah,
really?
I think it's been a lot more vocal. The skeptics organizations have had a lot to do with that because they've made it clear to people that if you say even what your interest is in this subject, it's going to affect your credibility. They end up making fun of people, basically.
Yeah.
Brian Josephson, who is the Nobel Prize winner for the superconducting circuit, a couple of years ago was uninvited to a physics conference, publicly uninvited, because of his interest in parapsychology. And fortunately, his colleagues had had such a hue and cry, the people who were attending, saying that, what does that have to do with anything? He's there as a physicist. He's not there as a parapsychologist.
Right.
So he got re-invited, but I'm not even sure if he actually went at that point. But it's that kind of attitude. Daryl Bem of Cornell University was doing some research on precognition, and when it became known that he had a paper that was being submitted to a mainstream psychology journal, the hue and cry by the academic community, the science community, it was insane. People were, the most unscientific things I've ever read came out of the mouths of some of the top scientists in the world, who are basically saying, how dare they spend any time or energy in the journal? How dare anybody support this research? It's fundamentally, flawed. It's fun. They didn't read the paper. They didn't know what the results were. They didn't even know if his results were negative. So they just basically said, well, you can't really publish a paper on this. So when we have our Parapsychological Association convention, which is coming up in August here in the Bay Area this year, we don't expect to find too many people from outside the field attending because that's pretty rare.
Wow. And, although, to be honest, that same trend seems to be happening in a lot of different fields. That
Yes.
More and more closed-mindedness, and which is really scary to me because you would think that we would be going the other direction. But
you would think
but
that
everybody's everybody's fighting for funding. That's a big piece of it. Yeah, it's a big piece of it. Nobody wants to do or say anything that's going to jeopardize their own funding. UCLA is even disavowing that they had a parapsychology laboratory back in the 70s and early 80s. They're completely disavowing that now, and that's a matter of record. So,
wow.
And that could be because of funding. They're trying to get some new funding, so maybe that's why they're doing it.
And you have to wonder if a bit of that is a change in perspective of funding overall, and not just in these fields, but I see it in lots of fields that, just more closed-mindedness.
Oh, yeah.
More the view that, a very fundamentalist, retro viewpoint, and across all sciences and liberal arts as well. That,
when they started building the CERN super collider over in Europe, There were a lot of people that were, spreading rumors about them going to create a black hole, or there's all sorts of stuff that was there, that was bad science that was put out there. I used to work at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, which is a national laboratory funded by the Department of Education. Energy. A little tired today. And the DOE funds a lot of different kinds of research there, as do other organizations. I was working in the library, so I heard people talk a lot about their various research projects and what they were researching. And a lot of the scientists were working on things or coming up with things that didn't fit the kind of normal paradigm. So they were, you'd hear conversations, people saying things like, I can't really tell anybody about this. They'll think it's nuts and could jeopardize my funding. But I got the data here. And they were afraid to actually go any further with it because it's like crazy science, which, when you think about it, so much of our history of science has been scientists sticking behind some ideas that everybody else thought were crazy. That's how science develops.
Yeah.
There are physicists who write either under their own name or under pseudonyms. They write science fiction stories, and they'll put their theories in those stories. They will not use them, put them in a physics paper. They'll put them in a story. And then they'll kind of talk to their colleagues about whether they've read that story and what do they think of that idea. It's kind of a weird idea, isn't it? Without revealing that they were the ones who put it in there to begin with.
Wow. Well, though, with that kind of environment, I can see why, though.
Yeah.
But it almost reminds you of the Inquisition in some ways.
There's a bit of that. There's also a real prejudice against anything that challenges materialism, as we think of, because that's what science is, empirical materialism, pretty much. And the ideas of consciousness in general that are not connected directly to and limited by materialist ideas of neurology are extremely biased against. Yeah. So anyone suggesting anything that has anything beyond what the brain can do, there's a huge bias against that, because that's the option. Even though, and there are people in my field, by the way, who do not believe in life after death and believe in ghosts or the possibility. There are people who are more materialist in my field, but we have a kind of an open debate about this. We don't have any sort of, and we might say, yeah, you're crazy, but we do it in a really nice way.
Right.
to each
but at
other.
least there could be discussion.
Right, and there are ways to look at these ideas. If people are open to discussing them, there are ways to look at them that turn out to fit their worldview, the other side's worldview. It's just a matter of semantics sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. That happens so often in so many things. What are you working on next? Do you know?
Do I know?
Or chocolate.
Or chocolate. Well, the summertime is not the best time to do chocolate, unfortunately.
So any time is good for chocolate.
Well, it gets hot, it melts. It's tough. I keep a lot of chocolate around. The next couple of months, besides some courses that I'm offering, I'm the arrangements chair for the Parapsychological Association's convention, like I said, which is happening here in Concord, California in August. So I'll be busy with some of that, teaching classes, and I'm going to be working on possibly a couple other projects with Ed May. We're talking about some other projects there, and hopefully do some work with a couple of other researchers to apply remote viewing to some of our cases, to really I'm trying to do some more work with psychics and other people in some of the case investigations. I have a number of students who've gone through who are more psychic, and working with more mediums because of the Forever Family Foundation. So I'm trying to see where I can apply that to field investigative methods and see what kind of data we can get out of that.
If like from the flip side, from our perspective, if someone is wanting to start working with a remote viewer, what kind of criteria and everything that we should be looking at in order to?
Well, it's not always easy to find a good psychic. That is true. Remote viewing as a technique, there are different methods that people have been teaching and learning that, and in fact, some of them are incredibly complicated, There's controlled remote viewing, CRV, which is incredibly left-brained, as they used to say, very, very logical, mathematical, almost plotting. But we find that people can pretty much do it if they just sit down and try it. A lot of people are able to develop it. It's actually about getting your own normal thought processes and senses out of the way and not thinking about it. So you can teach people to do remote viewing basically, and even try it with a bunch of different people trying to free associate on a target. One of the things I'm planning on trying is using a haunted location as a target and seeing, before you do the investigation, what people who are psychic or non-psychic can pick up on the place. Gertrude Schmeidler, Micheline Mayer used to do an experiment, a protocol which works great for any investigative group to try, which is you bring people into a house that is ostensibly haunted, and you walk them around with a floor plan and have them all separately mark where they think stuff is going on. And you might do that. The best way to do it is with 2 or 3 homes, only one of which is haunted, and see if they pick up stuff in the one but not in the other 2, and see if everybody picks up the same thing the witnesses have. You also walk the witnesses through to see whether they have any sort of correlation or correspondence. And then you can find out whether the people who claim to be psychic are more sensitive than just your average person or not. So what you have to do with psychics or people who are doing, whether it's remote viewing or otherwise, is just try them out and see if they do well. And if they do well, great. If they don't do well, give them a couple chances and do it that way. But the one thing you have to be careful of is the personality of the individual who is the psychic, because people who are psychics, not so much mediums, mostly psychics, but even sometimes mediums, they can be very diva. They can be very egocentric. They can disagree with everything the investigators say. They can be very hard to work with different personalities in the group. And I've met some of the very, very psychic people in the world who I would never take on a case investigation because they don't fit my criteria of playing well with others.
Yeah.
One of the key factors is sense of humor, especially about themselves. If they take themselves way too seriously and start tossing around things like I'm 97% accurate, I can't work with them because
I had somebody do that.
They really can't even confirm. They can't even say how they know they're 90% accurate.
Right.
Because they can't track everything.
Now, this person actually repeated that she's 99% accurate within a 5-minute conversation, probably 10 times. I mean,
really?
Yeah,
my response is always, how are you tracking that?
Yeah.
Because what I find that a lot of times it's they do readings for people and they are like 99% of their people are happy with the reading. That doesn't mean they're accurate. That just means they have 99% customer satisfaction.
That means you told them what they wanted to hear.
Right. Right.
And probably a few of them just are going to smile and not tell you that you were wrong.
Exactly. Who's going to complain to a psychic? I mean, people are embarrassed if they, for that.
Right. That's true. That's true.
That's very, very true.
I'm 100% accurate, so.
That's just when you're rating the refrigerator.
That's still accurate.
You're just looking for chocolate.
Yeah.
You're just wanting to bring up chocolate again.
And Diet Mountain Dew.
If someone really is wanting to incorporate these methods into investigations, is there somewhere that you would refer them to contact people that may be suitable?
To contact psychics and other folk?
Yeah, especially for remote viewing, things like that.
That's a tough thing, unfortunately. We don't have any sort of organization of viewers. There is an association for remote viewing, ARVA, that works with people and teaches people to do controlled remote viewing, associative remote viewing, and such. So that's a good place to start. But there's not really any sort of organization that we do. We do have, closest we have in parapsychology is the Windbridge Institute worked with mediums and developed a list of research mediums, 20 research mediums, who actually went through an incredibly lengthy process to show their ability to the researchers and their willingness also to work in research. And some of them do remote viewing, in fact. Sometimes the medium, you have to look at their list. So Windbridge Institute, it's windbridge.org. Again, there's a link on my website. to that. And you can look at the list of research mediums, look at their website, see if any of them also do remote viewing. The Forever Family Foundation has a list of certified mediums, some of whom do remote viewing as well. They're not just mediums. So, and then you can also contact places like the Rhine Center for recommendations as well.
Okay. We're getting close to the end here, and go ahead and give everyone your website and where they can find your books, Loyd.
Sure. My website is mindreader.com. My chocolate website is hauntedbychocolate.com. There you go. My books, my last 4 books are available via Amazon. So you just pop my name into Amazon, you'll see the books that are in print. I also recommend that a lot of my older books are still great, and they're available for used a lot cheaper than you could buy them new anyway. So I suggest that you kind of take a look at my first one, especially ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, which is kind of a guide to ghost hunting.
And when's your next book come out?
Early June it will come out. So it's not listed on Amazon because we're going through CreateSpace. So it'll be out about a week after we get done. Yeah, we're going through them. But it'll be early June. It's called ESP Wars. And then I'm also teaching a course coming up for the Edgar Cayce folks. You go to edgarcayce.org and look at their e-groups. I'm teaching one on becoming more psychic. And that starts, it's in a kind of an open e-group, which starts this Wednesday, in fact. Coming up.
Check into that.
Well, thank you very much, Loyd, and we hope to have you back sometime. It was a fascinating talk and really enjoyed it. And you take care.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
And everybody stay tuned with Selena Rowe and Closer to Death with Josh Hurd.
Thank you, everyone.